Amy, let me tell you about a magical place that is so exactly designed to be enclosed space, year-round fun for the whole family that I bet you already know what I'm going to say before I even say the name. Let's say it together on 3. 1, 2, 3. Great Wolf Lodge. You got it, Amy.
My kids loved Great Wolf Lodge when we went. You probably already know that it has a huge indoor water park with a wave pool, lazy river, a bunch of massive water slides. But then your pack can hit the other attractions because wait, there's more.
Great Wolf Lodge has adventure-packed attractions like Magi Quest, a live-action game kids can play throughout the lodge, plus the Northern Lights Arcade. Spent some quality time there, so your kid who loves the lazy river and your kid who loves fantasy games will both have a great time.
Great Wolf Lodge also offers great dining options and complimentary daily events like nightly dance parties, all under one roof. Unpack the car once and you're settled in to have fun. And with 22 lodges across the country, you're always a short drive away from adventure.
We've both had such great times at Great Wolf Lodge, so bring your pack together at a lodge near you. Learn more at greatwolf.com and strengthen the pack. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fresh Take from What Fresh Hell, laughing in the face of motherhood. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy. And today we're talking to Christina Hillsberg. She's a former spy with many years of service at the CIA. Her new book is License to Parent: How My Career as a Spy Helped Me Raise Resourceful, Self-Sufficient Kids, which provides both an inside look into one of the world's most clandestine organizations and a practical guide for how to utilize key spy tactics to teach kids important life skills. Christina and her husband, Ryan, live near Seattle, Washington, with their 5 children and 2 Rhodesian Ridgebacks. Welcome, Christina.
Hi, thanks for having me.
How old are all these kids that you have?
So our kids are ranging from 3 to 18. So we've got our oldest is going off to college in just a few weeks, which is wild. And then, we have as young as 3. It's a full house around here, especially during pandemic
That
times.
gets a thoughts and prayers from us, 3 to 18.
Thank you.
That really is everything combined. You've got diapers and college applications.
Well, I will say,
are you out of diapers, hopefully?
yeah, that was one of the pros to the pandemic, is that I got to do potty training while having nowhere to go.
Yes, that's important.
So, Christina, I want to start with how you became a spy, because it's one of these jobs that somebody does, but you don't think that you could do. It isn't something that you could decide to do. How did you choose this life for yourself?
It's funny you ask, because it really was more of an accident than anything else. I went to college at Indiana University. I studied linguistics and Swahili and African studies. It was something that really interested me. I had no idea what I was going to do after college. I just knew I wanted to be in Africa. I thought, I'd probably do the Peace Corps, do some sort of humanitarian aid organization. So it's like, how does someone with that plan end up at the CIA? But they actually recruited me off of my campus. They were looking for foreign language speakers. And as you can imagine, Swahili and Zulu are not languages they come across very often in America. And so that gave me a bit of a leg up. And I just fell into the interview and had a really fantastic experience with the recruiter when he was explaining to me that I would be able to analyze African politics and African leaders. For our U.S. policymakers, I would write for our president. I would travel back and forth to the continent. And it sounded pretty exciting. I'd never considered espionage before, and I didn't realize that there was, a part of it that was kind of more of this nerdy research side that really spoke to me. And so I fell into it. And then, of course, later on in my career, I did transition over to the operational side and did some more clandestine work, which means I was collecting intelligence, meeting with assets, and collecting foreign intelligence of interest to the U.S. So I've done a little bit on both sides of the house.
Now, our impression of spies is obviously pretty wacky, probably, to you, coming from mostly movies and TV shows. So what do people get wrong about what the life of a spy is like? Probably most things.
James Bond is probably the most terrible spy. Jason Bourne, too. Although I do love watching a good Jason Bourne film, or even Jack Ryan. They're very entertaining. But we like to say that if a spy is chasing someone, or they're being chased, or they've pulled out a gun, they've done something terribly wrong. Because espionage should really be done in the shadows. It should be happening right under the noses of foreign governments without them even realizing that it's there. And, what you see in the movies is very flashy and it's very entertaining. And there's some very exciting, gadgets and things like that, of course, at the agency. But it's a little bit different from Hollywood for sure.
This book is full of fascinating, because of course I like the James Bond stuff, but I loved reading in the book about how these things were different and all sorts of. You talk at one point about when you're being tailed by somebody, they might change their clothes, but they probably won't change their shoes. So you have to get good at looking at what shoes people are wearing. It's all kinds of stuff like that I loved that level of detail.
Yeah, there's a lot of really great operational stories, especially, part one is mostly memoir of how I ended up at the CIA and how I met my husband there, who worked on the clandestine side for most of his career, well, all of his career. And then, of course, my journey into parenthood. So in part two, when I get into some of these CIA principles that we use with our kids, my husband Ryan actually has, these sidebars throughout that section of the book in each chapter where he tells stories with meeting with his assets, from his operational training at the farm, the CIA's covert training facility that you do see depicted in some of these TV shows and movies. And so I think that gives it a really fun flavor. But really, all of these principles, they're real things that we did at the CIA, but they're real techniques that we really think are useful for kids to have. And so we've looked for ways to apply them to parenting in simple and straightforward manners so that really we can prepare our kids to be well-rounded and security conscious, because the CIA really, wants its officers to be prepared for anything the world throws at them when they're out there conducting espionage. They want them to be well equipped. And we really want our kids to be well equipped to be successful in the world as well. And so many of these techniques can translate into helping our kids be successful.
Now, how did you first see that as a parent? I wouldn't think necessarily like CIA training and parenting have a lot. I would think those Venn diagrams are just two separate circles.
Right.
But what even gave you this concept?
I love that you said Venn diagram, because that is totally how I've used to see it. And I describe it like that a lot, because I thought of like, here's my life, over here at the CIA. And then I became a parent. They're like these two separate spheres, but really there is so much overlap. And it wasn't until I had observed the way my husband was parenting. So he had 3 kids when we met, and they were 6, 8, and 9. And he was already using some of these principles. And I remember I was kind of skeptical at first, because I had viewed these as, different parts of my life. And I had always thought I would be more of a helicopter type parent. I was a lot more anxious than he was. Of course, I was coming from the analytics side. I was someone who's more data driven, more kind of black and white, the way I viewed the world. Whereas my husband is much more kind of suave, lives in the gray, like a true spy, I suppose. And, he was using some of these principles, and I noticed that he gave his kids so much autonomy, but he also, just kind of gave them this independence. They were making purchases in the store by themselves. They were all able to ride a motorcycle at those ages. They were shooting bow and arrow. They were just really interesting kids, so well-rounded. And that's one of the key qualities that we emphasize throughout the book. It's this idea of being well-rounded, because when you're conducting espionage, you're building relationships with other people with an ultimate goal of getting them to, agree to a clandestine relationship with the CIA, right? So you need to build trust with them. And one of the best ways to build trust is to build rapport through common interests. And so CIA officers often want to be very multifaceted so that they can build these relationships with people. And so that's a concept that we've adapted with our kids. And that was one of the things that I noticed right off the bat with Ryan's kids when we were dating, was that they were so multifaceted. And they were more interesting than I was. And I was nearly 30 years old. And I was like, oh my goodness, these kids have all these hobbies. They're incredible. And so I knew he was doing something right.
You might think from the outside that teaching kids, to ride motorcycles and shoot bows and arrows and being, ready for any outcomes, that would create kids who were constantly sort of looking over their shoulder, who were fearful, or who lived in a reality where something really bad's going to happen all the time. But in practice, you have found that's actually the opposite is true.
Exactly. So yeah, it does the opposite. It's not raising them to be paranoid, thinking that there's danger lurking around every corner. Instead, we're preparing them to go out in the world by introducing these ideas in a very organic, adventurous, and fun way over time. And so when these skills are, introduced step by step and not in a vacuum, it's actually more empowering than intimidating. And you find that your kids are more capable than you thought, and you become less anxious, and you realize that your kids are ready for these things because you're building upon each one one at a time. We actually think statistically the chances of them encountering one of these dangerous situations is very low. But the idea is just like the CIA trains its officers for worst case scenario, we do the same for our kids in a very fun, organic way so that anything they encounter in the world is going to be much easier and they're ready for it and it's no big deal.
We've kind of eliminated a lot of this stuff from our day-to-day lives as modern people in a very specific kind of a way. And I find that letting my kid use an axe or shoot a bow and arrow or stay outside for 7 days, even though they get horrible bug bites. My instinct is like, if you get a bug bite, come inside. You don't want to get more. What happens when you move through some of these things is more interesting than I think what my instinct tends to be, which is let's spare you the thought or the practice of any of those things.
Yeah, I think that's what comes naturally to me as well. And I'm very transparent about the fact that this is not a parenting style that comes naturally to me, giving this autonomy. And we talk also about like giving our kids room to fail. I'm naturally, wanting to bring them in. Oh, there's bugs out there. Let's get inside. That is what feels comfortable to me. And so I think what's great is that as readers are going through License to Parent, they're seeing it through my eyes and how I've kind of come around to a lot of these techniques that Ryan has used. And I'm also really open when we don't agree because, that's how marriage works and parenting, with a partner. You're not always going to see eye to eye. And, you got to call each other out on those
You're
things.
saying you sometimes don't agree with your spouse? Oh, my.
I know. It's crazy, right?
Shocking news.
Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to get into these skills that you've taught your kids and talk about how we can teach them to ours. For some of us, tax season is one of the only times that we look at our finances fully. And once it's over, well, that was terrible. And it is completely understandable not to want to think about it for another whole year. But using Monarch and being intentional with your finances in an ongoing way helps you see where your money is going and how you can put your refund to best use.
We are here to tell you, simplify your finances with Monarch. Monarch is the all-in-one personal finance tool designed to make your life easier. It brings your entire financial life, budgeting, accounts and investments, net worth, and future planning together in one dashboard on your phone or laptop.
Feel aware and in control of your finances this tax season and get 50% off your Monarch subscription with code FRESH.
As you know, my husband and I are preparing to send, 3 kids off to college, and I cannot tell you how helpful Monarch has been in showing us our full financial picture, helping us to track our spending and reach important savings milestones. Our weekly meeting, Amy, it's now run by Monarch.
Love it. Achieve your financial goals for good with Monarch, the all-in-one tool that makes money management simple.
Use code FRESH at monarch.com for half off your first year. That's 50% off at monarch.com, code FRESH.
You know that thing where you get an amazing pair of shoes at a really great price and want to tell everyone about it? Yeah, so do we. Here at Designer Shoe Warehouse, we'll give you something to brag about, like the latest styles from brands you love, or the trends everyone's obsessing over, or shoes that make you feel like, well, you. So go ahead, show off a little. Find shoes that get you at prices that get your budget. Head to your DSW store or DSW.com today. DSW, let us surprise you.
Okay, so one of the chief tenets of CIA field training, at least I understand this now from having read the book, is getting off the X. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. So getting off the X is this idea that the CIA teaches, and the X means danger. It can be anything, a person, a place, an environment, anywhere the danger rears its ugly head, and you need to get out. And so we raise this in the book because people do have a tendency to have that curiosity of wanting to get closer. And Ryan, my husband, tells a great story in the book of training where he's moving closer to the X to kind of check it out, and it doesn't go the way that it was supposed to. And you can have that tendency to want to move closer, or also you can freeze. And so we introduce this idea with our kids early on so that they understand that when there's danger, the most important thing is to get off the X and move. And that doesn't mean, running away in a cowardly way. It just means that understanding the concept that the longer you stay on the X, the more likely it is that you'll be harmed. So you hear of these scenarios of, people hiding or people playing dead. That's a last case scenario. That's a last resort. You want to get out of there. So we talk to them about listening to their gut. And there are a few different ways that we do this in our house. We are a big movie family. I think that's one of the things that we missed the most during the pandemic was going to the movie theater. And so we use movies a lot to illustrate these points. I talk about using Finding Nemo for younger kids. There's a great scene where Dory and Marlon go through the trench, something. And, Dory had a feeling they shouldn't go through the trench, but couldn't put her finger on it. Of course, it was her short-term memory, but then they end up going through these jellyfish. And so it's a great sort of illustration to start talking to your kids about this idea of listening to their gut. And then, of course, we use more mature movies like Taken with our older kids. And so there are a lot of different options for families to start to teach this concept of listening to your gut. But we also talk about visualizing escape routes, training your kids when you get somewhere to just kind of get a lay of the land, not in a scary or paranoid way, but just sort of understanding when you're somewhere, where are the exits? Where would I leave if I had to? But then also this idea of listening to alarms and warning signals. We want our kids to understand that if there's an alarm or a warning signal, they need to respond with a sense of urgency, even if they think it's a drill. And it doesn't mean that they have to be over the top and, plow people over to get out, but we want them to take it seriously and not look around to see what everyone else is doing, to just respond with that urgency. Lastly, I'll say that we also talk to them about this idea of sometimes ignoring authority figures, particularly in emergency scenarios. Just because someone is an authority figure doesn't mean they know the right thing to do. And the example I give in the book is the 2014 Korean ferry boat disaster. The voice over the intercom was telling them to stay put in their rooms. The ones who didn't listen to that voice of authority are the ones who survived. And so really, that gets to this idea of critical thinking, which is woven throughout all of CIA training. And really, we've tried to hammer home throughout this book and all of these principles is this idea to teaching your kids to think critically.
These have applications for peer pressure situations. You get those alarm bells when kids are misbehaving in a way that makes you uncomfortable. An exit strategy from that may play out a lot more often than a spectacular disaster.
Yes. And we talk about that as well in the book. Maybe it's a party that your kids are considering going to and, having that discussion with your kids beforehand. Do you have some sort of word that they'll use or some sort of agreement if they call you and they need to get out somewhere that you're going to come get them? No questions asked, having those conversations with your kids because there are much more practical scenarios. The X can be anything. It can be a party. It can be a person. It can be, it doesn't need to be, you're exactly right, these sort of catastrophic scenarios. And we hope that they won't be.
I want to talk about the idea of, getting off the X might mean for our kids offending somebody, not listening to an authority figure, right? And that you talk in the book about how you sort of explain to your kids that will be okay with you if they're doing that in the service of getting off the X, so to speak. And I feel like for girls, this is even more important training than for boys, that we can go with our gut and not worry about being nice. I mean, maybe I'm watching too many episodes of the Ted Bundy true crime documentary on Amazon Prime. I mean, it's a long time ago and it's not a long time ago of the survivors of that being like, I was trying to help him and I wanted to be nice, but I just had this feeling, right? And it was the ones who honored that feeling and ran and screamed and whatever. Some of them got to survive. And I feel like that's a really important lesson, especially for girls. But is it hard to do that and then not have like a fourth grader who talks back to the principal all the time? How do you find that fine line?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, I want to go back to what you said about girls because I absolutely agree. And one of the stories that I share in the book, it was an experience of me getting off the X at the park with my two youngest kids. And what had immediately happened, this shady character was circling us at the park. And I felt in my gut that this was, someone with malintentions. I needed to get out of there quick. Thankfully, got my kids out of there quickly. And I delayed calling the police because I had this whole, we're fine. I'm not going to call the police and be in imposition. They're just going to think I'm like a harebrained woman overreacting. I'm sure it's nothing. And then eventually when I did call, he said, well, gosh, I wish you would have called sooner because, I've had several calls about this person and I was just there and I questioned him and there were several concerns and I wish I had this information as well. I think as women and even young girls, we can be afraid to speak up. So I think this is absolutely important to emphasize with our daughters in those situations. But yeah, the other issue is how to introduce that nuance so you don't have kids, just disrespectfully talking back. And so it's helping your kids to understand that there's a time and a place and that there's an appropriate way to question authority because it's not only in these emergency scenario situations. It might be a teacher who's teaching something as fact, but actually it's their opinion. And that does happen a lot nowadays. And I think, assessing information has become more and more important. And we want our kids to have those abilities. We want them to, again, this comes back to that thinking critically, but teaching them to do it in a respectful way. And of course, this gets easier as your kids get older.
Right.
I have a 3 and a 4-year-old. This is more of like an authoritarian regime at this point.
You want a 3-year-old to have a different relationship to authority than a 16-year-old, because you do pretty much want a 3-year-old to be following what adults tell them. They don't have the critical thinking skills to get there. It evolves.
Yeah, exactly. But it's funny because you can see even at a young age which kids may be more prone to like following the rules. And so I think it makes it all the more important to start emphasizing that to the extent that we can. And then those critical thinking skills will evolve over time.
Can we talk about how you might teach your kids not just to get off the X, but to find safety? Like I'm thinking about when my kids were little and we'd go, I don't know, to Disney World, somewhere where they were getting separated from me could be a thing that would happen. I would always tell them to find a mom with kids because I felt like, okay, that's a clear marker. Like that's somebody who I would think would be trustworthy and who would make sure that they got their way back to me. I'm sure there are more subtle tells, reads, things we can teach kids along the way. How do you talk to your kids about that?
That's a great plan. I love that. We talk about a family meeting spot in case of emergency, and that's, it can be our home, it can be a spot in town or something, having these conversations with our kids so that they know where would we go if there's an emergency.
It's part of, I guess, these sort of the softer skills of powers of observation, right? Or not just about that knife looks sharp, but it's also like that lady looks nice. They're both important, I guess.
Yeah, I think actually what it really comes down to is not necessarily like a tangible, playbook of like, here's where you would go, here's what you would do, right? It's more intangible in terms of teaching our kids things like learning how to improvise and emphasizing things early on, like being aware of their surroundings, learning landmarks so that they can find their way home, right? So if they're in a situation where they have to find their way home, if you've spent time, making sure that your kids are paying attention on the ride home. I remember when I learned how to drive, I don't think I knew how to go anywhere. I had just like blindly my whole childhood just ridden along for the ride and not paid attention. So it was really important to me that from the time my kids were babies, even well before they were talking back, saying things like, oh, we're going to pass this farm with the cows on the right. Here we go. We're turning left. There's the statue, and emphasizing things like that from an early stage. So it doesn't become, if this specific situation happens, here's where you go, right? Because it's never going to be a specific thing, right? We don't know what's going to happen. And they need to have the skills to improvise and come up with different solutions based on the scenario. And so when we teach them these improvising skills, like being aware of their surroundings, know their landmarks, know how to read a map, know what to do when technology fails, different things like the directions, right? Looking at the sun, the stars, the wind, and I give an example of our teenage daughters and how, they were in a situation where they're being followed home one night. And, this is something that we had never said specifically, if you ever think you're being followed, duck into a gas station. We had never had that conversation, right? But we had enough, hypothetical. We also do a lot of role playing in our family situations that they decided, okay, we forgot our cell phones. These two men look like they're following us. Instead of walking all the way home on the dimly, lit path, we're going to divert and go over to this gas station, duck inside and ask to use the phone, right? So that's a perfect example of kids being able to think on their feet and make that decision based on just kind of all the situational awareness you've built them up with over the years.
It's so important. I was with my son the other night. He was driving. I have an 18-year-old, and we were trying to get back into New York City, and we kept getting diverted. It was one of these things. There was traffic to the bridge. So Google Maps put us on these local roads. But of course, then the cops blocked off the local road. But Google Maps doesn't know that. So Google Maps keeps sending you around the block. It's the same mistake over and over again. And he was just like, oh, well, I guess I just have to do this. Like Michael Scott driving into the lake on The Office, right?
Yes.
Like, it told me to turn, so I turned. And so then I was like, okay, well, let's look at these two tall buildings that we're passing. We've definitely passed them coming this way. Now we're passing them coming this way. And I'm still saying this way and this way because I'm a dum-dum with east and west too. But right, I started to be like, okay, the city's there. We've already passed them this way. I think we have to come. And all of a sudden I felt like this swashbuckling explorer. But yeah, we needed to start to use our wits to figure out how we were going to get out of this gridlock traffic. And it was a skill that he really didn't possess at all. And I possessed just a little more than barely.
Just a little more than barely.
It wasn't great. We made it. I mean, I'm home.
I love it.
I made it home.
I think that story is so relatable, though, for so many people, because we've all become so reliant on using our phones to get wherever we need to go. And so I love the idea of, teaching our kids to study a paper map, to study a city. And I have to do that. I'm not someone who has this like innate sense of direction. My husband has it. My youngest son even has it. I don't know what it is, but I can't just go somewhere and walk a city and figure it out. So, and this goes back to my training at the CIA too, whereas when we were doing surveillance detection routes, you would get out a map and literally, write out your route, with a pencil on an old school map. And so for me, if I can study the map beforehand and memorize the streets, then I'm okay. But just kind of finding it out on the fly is really difficult for me. And so a lot of this is, knowing your own strengths, knowing your kids' own strengths so that they have these skills and they can play to them. And we want to know our way around if we're in a city or a town or wherever we are, because we don't want to be a target of thieves. We don't want to be, when you're in espionage, of course, you're wanting to look natural because you don't want to be followed, by an intelligence service on the way to your asset meeting. So of course, our purpose is different nowadays, but it's never a good idea to be staring down at your cell phone in a city when you're lost, whether you're a kid or an adult. You want to have your wits about you. You want to be, aware of all of your surroundings. So it's teaching our kids, but also us to study maps beforehand so that we have an idea of where we're going so that we can be alert.
Let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll dive a little bit deeper into the whys behind this. Amy, when I'm having a good hair day, it usually makes my whole day better. And that's why on every day, I'm taking Nutrafol.
Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand. And it's the #1 hair growth supplement brand personally used by dermatologists. Nutrafol's hair growth supplements are peer-reviewed, NSF certified for sport, and clinically tested.
Nutrafol offers multiple formulas for men and women tailored to different life stages and lifestyle factors, so you get support that's actually right for you. Adding Nutrafol to your daily routine is easy. Order online, no prescription needed, with automated deliveries and free shipping to keep you on track.
Let your hair be one less thing to worry about. See visibly thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair in 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol.
For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you visit Nutrafol.com and enter promo code LAUGHING.
That's Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code LAUGHING. All my kids learned to swim when they were little. It was super important to me that they be confident and safe in the water. There was only one problem with that: taking them to swim lessons. I mean, the pools were freezing. There were always cranky adults doing laps right there. And it was definitely not, for any of us, what you would call fun.
Amy, heard. But now there's Goldfish Swim School. Goldfish takes a really thoughtful approach to swim lessons, combining research-based teaching with a warm, kid-friendly environment that actually helps kids thrive in the water.
Every detail at Goldfish is thoughtfully designed to create a golden experience, from shiver-free, warm indoor pools to comfy waiting areas for parents to professionally trained lifeguards on deck.
Goldfish uses an approach called the science of swim play, which combines guided play with proven teaching techniques to help kids learn to swim, build water safety skills, and gain confidence, all at their own pace. Lessons are designed to meet kids exactly where they're at.
If you've been thinking about swim lessons or just wondering where to start, this is a great opportunity. Right now, Goldfish Swim School is offering a waived membership plus your child's first lesson free at participating locations.
Just visit goldfishswimschool.com/free to find a location near you and enroll using promo code FREE.
That's goldfishswimschool.com/free, promo code FREE. So I want to go back, Christina, to what you were saying earlier about, there's a reason to do this stuff that goes beyond what if your kid is in a crumbling building, they'll know what to do. And obviously we want our kid to know what to do in those situations. But it occurs to me as I was just telling that story about, trying to get into New York City, I immediately felt like I was in Apocalypse Now. And it was just, it just was bad traffic on a Sunday night. But it felt scary. And the part that felt scary, I think, was like, I don't know how I'm going to get home. And Google Maps won't tell me, right? So, and the situation, maybe the key is that it make a situation like that feel less scary because I would have that training. It wasn't that situation was so scary in and of itself. It just was like, I felt like I didn't have agency because I didn't know how to approach it. Is it about giving kids agency?
That's right. I think it gives them a confidence when they have this training. They don't then get that, that anxious, like, what do I do? It's this very confident, feeling that they have that they can handle it and they can think through it. And I think as parents, particularly as parents like myself, who are more of the anxious variety, it helps me feel more comfortable letting them leave the house. We have teenagers going out on their own. And, of course, I feel like we had, hard in a lot of ways, but easy in terms of our teenagers haven't really been going a lot of places over the past, year plus.
It's been easy to surveil them because they're just in their bedrooms 24 hours a day.
Yes. Yeah. And all of a sudden they have places to go, people to see. But it gives you, more of a confidence and a peace knowing that if they are in that situation, whether it's traffic or whether it's a disaster, they have these skills and, they have that confidence. You have that confidence and, it's more of a recipe for success.
I think that's right. And it goes so into this sort of being capable results in self-esteem. And that's sort of a missing factor that I think a lot of us struggle with is, well, my kids need to be resilient, but at the same time, we don't want anything bad to ever happen to them. And so we end up kind of moving obstacles out of the way, not letting them get bug bites, not letting them ever be in dangerous situations. But then we're sort of like, but they don't seem to have a lot of confidence in themselves. And that does seem like a circle we can square at a certain point by saying, it's not so much that you're like, okay, when disaster strikes, here's exactly how you're going to survive using these kind of elite tactics. It's really about putting things in kids' paths that say to them, whatever comes, you're up to the challenge.
Exactly. Yeah, I'd agree. We want to protect our kids so much. And then in a lot of ways, we're doing them a disservice because we don't want them to get hurt. And so we're not giving them experiences, opportunities to experience the world. Mm-hmm. And when they do have these experiences and when we let them fail, they learn from it. The CIA trains, particularly on the clandestine side, expecting people to fail. And I will tell you that it's very uncomfortable when you're that person because you become the class example. So Ryan and I have both been in that scenario, but you will never make that mistake again. And you've learned from it. And I think that's so crucial for our kids as well. But I think the other part that Ryan and I try to do is if we know our kids are struggling in a certain area or they've had a failure in one area, we go to another area where we know they're going to have a win to help build their confidence. So for example, last month, our 4-year-old was doing a soccer camp and had a really tough experience. It was a really hard adjustment to going to a camp with a lot of kids after having not been around a lot of kids over the past year. And so that was a little rocky for him and for me. And so he was feeling kind of down and we saw it, but we made him kind of push through the week. But we decided to do something totally different at the end of the day one day and went out on the boat and gave him an opportunity to surf. And that was a win for him and that built confidence. And so it's kind of doing that balance of like, when you're letting your kid experience failure, is there some other area in their life that that they can have a win so that they can build on those tiny wins as well?
Something just occurs to me is the moment when we're sitting on the plane and, you're about to push back from the gate and the flight attendants do the thing that absolutely nobody pays attention to, right? You're supposed to refer to the seat back card and nobody does. And they're showing you where the emergency exits are and nobody's looking, let alone telling their kids. Sometimes I do with my kids, like, well, let's see. Oh, I think that exit's closer. Do you think this one or that one's closer? But what do you think it is? Is there something in human nature? That just seems to me like a really clear example. Like on the small chance this plane crashes, here's what you need to know about this plane. And people are like, I am not going to look up from my iPad because this is stupid. It'll be fine. Like, what is it about us that makes us not want to plan?
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. It's almost like, if we ignore it, it's not going to happen to us kind of thing. Yeah. I wonder if I'm sure there's some psychological research to support that. Like the idea that people, the concept of how people deal with death and tragedy, it's this idea of it can't happen to me or I don't want to talk about it, even though we all have the eventual reality of facing that. And so I think in that scenario, yeah, it's like we just don't want to think that that could happen to us. And if we do think that, then that creates anxiety for people. And so, yeah, oftentimes people ignore it. And, I think there's a balance. You don't have to, be overly cautious about it and, feel like the plane is going to go down. But I think having that awareness for where your exits are is absolutely important. But yeah, that's so interesting. I bet there's some really fascinating data behind that.
What do you do with your kids on a plane? Could they give those speeches? Are they really aware?
I think we are a little bit more in the gray about it. Like, I don't think we make them, listen and follow along the safety card by any means, but we make sure that they're aware of, the exits.
And I think it brings us to the sort of overall point of the book, this idea of like, well, doesn't it scare kids to tell them, about bad things that could happen? And I think your point is that teaching them to be prepared does the opposite of scaring them.
That's right. And we use, in the chapter where we talk about being prepared for emergency scenarios, we talk about, the fun ways that we introduce it with our kids, like the adventure bag that we give them when they're 3. And that's essentially an emergency survival bag that evolves as they get older. And every adult should have one too. We call them go bags later. And obviously the content will change over time. But, we sit down with our kids when they're 3 and we go through each and every item and we make it very exciting. A flashlight is very exciting. Ooh, your very own flashlight. Ooh, your very own package of Band-Aids, and kind of getting their investment into, this idea so that they're a part of it and they understand it and they're taking that on and carrying it around on hikes, and they're getting sort of this preparation mindset, and it becomes fun for them. And also, I think something I noticed about Ryan from the beginning, even though they were sometimes talking about, end of world scenarios and things that I thought were very scary, he had this way of using imagination with the kids that I think always made it really fun, and so they'd have adventure bags and, a Hobbit cloak, or, and it's everything down to like the food that we eat. Oh, tonight we're eating Hobbit food. You can basically put Hobbit in front of anything and it makes it like very cool and exciting for kids.
Amy is big on marketing. She's always like, you got to market this stuff to the kids.
Yeah. So I think that there are ways to do it, organically and fun so that it's empowering and not intimidating. And that's something that, readers can experience through my eyes in the book, because that was exactly how I felt in the beginning. And now here I am, with a 4-year-old riding a motorcycle and, life surprises you.
Wait, stop. Your 4-year-old rides a motorcycle?
Yeah. It's so funny. When I met Ryan and Lena, who's now 15, she was 6 at the time, she was riding one. All of the bigs they were smalls at the time, and I just thought he was crazy. I thought, who is this man? But I knew that he was like a very responsible dad. And I thought, okay, there's got to be some thought and logic behind this. And of course there was. And, it's multiple fold, not because motorcycle training is something the CIA does, but it's, it's this idea of emergencies. If there is gridlock, think about any sort of post-apocalyptic movie. How do they get around traffic? It's motorcycles. It's really just about talking to your family and being prepared for scenarios. What will you do if you can't use your car? Do you have a bicycle? Do you have a scooter? Doesn't have to be a motorcycle. I feel so much more comfortable letting our son Ari do this because I've seen him evolve, since he was very young. And I tried to be a little bit more in the gray and say, whenever we feel like he's coordinated enough and capable and ready. And that ended up being just last month. I'm someone who was such an anxious person and a very anxious mom, had a lot of postpartum anxiety, and I would have never thought that I would be comfortable with it. But the thing is, he's so capable and he is confident and he's doing great. And, the fear is never gone completely. And I think that's also something that's important to emphasize, that I know I'm probably always going to be an anxious parent on some level, right? And I know that that's what comes naturally to me. But my hope is that by sharing some of these principles, that other parents will find a way to give their kids, a little bit more autonomy as well, and that they can kind of enjoy watching their kids do more things than they thought that they could do before.
Christina's book is called License to Parent: How My Career as a Spy Helped Me Raise Resourceful, Self-Sufficient Kids. This is a fascinating book, and thanks so much for talking to us today.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.